Hi, it's Pastor Andy with Tuesday's discipleship video this week. And today and tomorrow, we're going to focus on a phrase that is used by Paul in Romans 16, verse 20. And a lot of people find this particular verse quite ironic and wonder if Paul really was understanding what he was writing. Let me read the verse for us. It says, "The God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you." Wow. I mean, where do you begin with that? And so as I began to think about where I was going to begin, I realized that this was probably going to take 2 days to discuss. Because first, the irony seems to be twofold here. First, we have that the God of peace is going to crush an opponent. Now, the idea of being peaceful and being crushing don't necessarily seem to fit together. So there's some irony. The second thing is that after this crushing, you have Paul saying, effectively, I hope you experience the grace of Jesus. Now again, he's just mentioned crushing, so it seems to be a little bit off here, a distortion of some connotation of what peace really means. If we think about the word graceful, for instance, we don't often put the idea of being graceful with crushing something. It just doesn't seem to fit. I don't know about you, but that's the way I think of it. So, is Paul having like a crisis moment here or something? I don't think he is, but let me explain it but I'm going to do this a little bit differently. I'm going to explain this without fully defining peace today. I'm going to look at peace a little bit more fully tomorrow, but today, I just want to take a few minutes here to try to share this without fully defining peace, but to try to give us an understanding of what Paul means anyway. And then tomorrow, I'll look more fully just at the word peace. In verse 20, we first must remember that context always determines meaning. And here, in this final paragraph of instruction, Paul has appealed to this group of Romans, to the people of the church at Rome, to watch out, to be on guard for false teachers. When we are on guard, our tensions are usually heightened. And that means that we're typically not at full peace. Now, Paul gives us a few details for what these false teachers might do. They are smooth talkers. They are deceivers. They flatter people. And as people heard these words being read by whomever was reading Paul's letter, they might have begun to think about those who might have said something nice to them. Oh, are they just flattering me? Might have thought about somebody who had deceived them, or at least tried to deceive them, not necessarily from within the church, but just someone else around. And so their mind might be thinking about these other people even as they're listening to this letter from Paul. But by talking about the God of peace, we must also realize that this word probably would have jumped out at the people because they just heard these words a few moments ago. Now, please understand, I am not saying the peace of God. The God of peace does have a peace of God that comes with it, but here it's talking about the God of peace. And in Romans 15:33, Paul has just instructed the church to pray to this God of peace. And then asking the God of peace to be with them, just as he also in verse 20 then says, let the grace of God, may the grace of God be with you. So when we link the idea of 15:33 with prayer and 16:20 with this idea of crushing Satan and God ultimately triumphing over the false teachers and Satan, then that would lead us to a point, or at least it can lead us to a point of peace. Therefore, as a part of our watching out for those who would lead us astray, Paul is suggesting to pray to the God of peace for protection and for wisdom to know who these people would be as a part of God helping us in this process. So if that is true, and I truly believe it is, then now we can better understand that the grace of God that comes from knowing Jesus, which is the closing remark here. As Paul wrote to the Ephesians, it is by grace that we are saved through faith, not of ourselves, so that no one can boast. Very, very common thing. Paul's letters to the Romans has talked about this difference between faith and works continuously. Romans 4, for instance, as he harkens back to the idea of of Abraham and the understanding of the Jew from ancient times that it was credited to him as righteousness, Romans 15:6, and yet somehow they had taken Abraham's being credited as righteousness and they had carried that forward several hundred years to the law of Moses. And Paul's saying, no, there's no correlation there at all. His faith is what made him righteous, not the keeping of the law. So now, with this idea of faith being so prominent throughout this letter, Paul is closing this letter, and this sentence is a reminder that the grace of God through Jesus is what saves us. And that should bring us peace, that we don't have to work for salvation because we can't work for salvation. We do serve because of being saved, but there is nothing we can do of ourselves to save us. So knowing that truth is a part of the peace that comes in knowing that we are saved. And if the people of Rome knew that, then Paul's encouragement in these words was to not let someone come in, typically a Judaizer, who said, you might have faith, but if you really want to prove yourself, then you must also do this. Now, we don't have what the this is in Romans, but for instance, in Philippians and Galatians, it was circumcision as a part of a symbol. So they were trying to come in and distort the meaning of the gospel, to steal the peace from the people. Again, the wording is important. Paul is not asking for God's grace to simply be with the people. He was writing the church. They already had received the grace of God. Rather, what Paul was doing was wanting them to experience the grace that God would give them, for the grace of God to be with them, for them to experience it fully. And then they would truly know peace. And that is only possible from the God of peace. And I will talk more about the God of peace in tomorrow's video.